Back in the summer of 93 or 94, my father decided to purchase the family's first IBM-compatible computer. We drove down to Lisburn to marvel at the PC world there, and its plethora of big boxes on shelves and beige cases of computing prowess as far as my young eyes could see. Alan Sugar had lost the computing war over here in the UK, and our Amstrad was starting to get very long in the tooth in the face of Moore's Law, which was still in full swing, meaning the computer you had bought a mere 2 years ago was now half the speed of the latest models. To say my father was able to make an informed decision would be an understatement. He worked with computers his entire professional career, and knew more than the entire staff of the building combined, but was much too modest to ever suggest so, always enjoying the sales pitch that the employees would provide, asking pertinent questions of them to see what they knew. He was convinced that multimedia devices were the way of the future, computers that came with expansion cards, and a new addition called a CD-ROM drive. This allowed for the reading of optical media, and incredible things like motion video, and music that came out of a pair of creative speakers, courtesy of something called a sound blaster. He settled for a Packard Bell with a 486DX2, and 4 megabytes of RAM that were eventually upgraded to 8. The company subsequently didn't have the greatest of reputations, but to my childlike sense of wonder, any computer in the store would have been incredible. We must have got lucky, because this particular specimen was outstanding beyond my wildest expectations. The multimedia machine came with a bonus multimedia pack of CDs, and in that pack, alongside digital encyclopedias and Windows 3.11 for workgroups, were games. Whoever picked these games had incredible taste. The Lord of the Rings, King's Quest VI, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, Jurassic Park, Dune, the Chessmaster 3000, and by default, Microsoft Solitaire, all games I've subsequently played and featured on this channel. I remember fighting tooth and nail with my brothers and my busy mother scheduling specific computing times for us, depending on whether we'd done our homework or not. The boot sequence as it went about checking its systems as opposed to instantly turning on like our previous Amstrad has been burned into my memory, and was like NASA going through the final checks before takeoff. It introduced us to something called Windows, and its seemingly limitless hard drive that was nearly 500 megabytes in size meant there was space aplenty for even more games. The Packard Bell was the first computer I played Warcraft on, and TIE Fighter. I could list practically every great DOS game I've played in the past before this channel's creation, and its genesis would lie in that single wondrous machine, including introducing my crush at the time to the wonders of PC gaming, and leaning ever closer to her to correct her mistakes, both of us in gales of laughter. But at the beating heart of every great computer lies its processor, and the Intel DX2 would go down in history. It was the first chip to use clock doubling, with an 8K on-chip cache shadowing the external bus. For every external bus cycle, there were now 2 internal logic clock cycles. What this meant to the layman was that it was far faster than the previous processors, and could handle DOS games for years to come, with the 486 being able to run anything from the 80s gaming scene all the way through to the end of the DOS era in 97. From the early 90s through to the new millennium, computing absolutely transformed, and the longevity of my beloved Intel processor was challenged. Eventually my family bought a Pentium machine in the late 90s, and it rendered the old Packard Bell completely obsolete on a technical level, being many times faster. But I wasn't ready to give up on my first IBM compatible yet. I strongly resisted the installation of something called Windows 95 because everything my old computer did was just fine for me. But eventually that came and I learned an entirely new way to work an operating system that has remained the de facto standard for the 27 years since. So in hindsight, it was probably a good idea to learn to move with the times. Then we got a US robotics modem, and the internet was suddenly reachable from our home. I remember an elderly neighbour coming over to witness it for the first time, and we spent a good hour just browsing through handmade HTML sites detailing UFO encounters. It even provided me with my first negative experience of something called Linux, when my father decided he wanted to install Red Hat on the machine, a decision that did not go down well. Fortunately, I was able to recover Windows, and most of the games I had lost. We had this incredible repository that we simply called the blank disk, which allowed multimedia users the opportunity to engage in hundreds of shareware demos of games. It was like a vast library of games for us to try, and we were almost paralysed by the sheer amount of choice. By the end of the decade, the poor old Packard Bell had become a litmus test for the compatibility of the games we played. The crowning achievement was managing to get the StarCraft multiplayer working on it, and we used to draw straws to see who would be laboured with the terrible frame rates of the machine. By the late 90s, the likes of FIFA 99 and Half-Life were well beyond the capabilities of the 486, but I found another use that would follow me for decades to come. A new craze was sweeping the land, something called Pokemon, and since it was a Game Boy game, there was no chance of playing it on our computers. Except Game Boy emulation. Turns out that the 486 ran just quickly enough for me to play Pokemon Red on it, while my brothers enjoyed all the 3D accelerated glory of the newer machines. The 486 continued to provide serviceable results by pretending to be a console, and introduced me to plenty of new games that way. We moved home then, and it found a place in my bedroom. My first ever bedroom machine, connected to a home network at all times. It was unbelievable to just have the internet there. And what did a teenager use it for alone in his bedroom? No, not that. Messaging. Instant messaging over ICQ, AOL, MSN, IRC, and the subsequent public chat rooms. An amazing world of instant communication that predated the popularity of the Nokia 3310 and its feature called text messaging. I remember messaging my soon-to-be first girlfriend proper using the Packard Bell. Her admission that she was going to miss seeing me and would like to do so outside of school. I remember the thousands of hours of group chats with friends and family, and how all of this incredible immediate contact has become commonplace with the rise of social media. By 2004, the Packard Bell was flagging. 10 years of service across the most transformative period of computing history. The applications it ran started to require operating systems that this machine just wasn't capable of installing, and eventually it was replaced, never to be booted up again. I sometimes wonder what happened to that beige box that we bought so many years ago. Now the only evidence it ever existed is a clutch of scratch CDs in an attic, and a sticker on my door that was once wrapped around a network cable. You're looking at it now. It might not seem like much of a legacy for the greatest processor I ever used, but the impact that its power had upon me and millions of others back in the 90s and through into the new millennium is something that even its instruction set just cannot compute. Feel free to share your memories in the comments if you want. And if you enjoyed this random retrospective about my old PC, feel free to check out the hundreds and hundreds of videos on my channel. I do all kinds of scripted stuff. And if you like what you see there, subscription is an option, but it's not mandatory. Until next time.